Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a while since I've posted anything, and I've been working on a lot of different things. I've especially been playing around with some of this new AI tech like ChatGPT and the similar tool that they have for image generation, the DALL-E AI image generator. And I'm really curious about how all this uh, is developing and how it's progressing and kind of how it's being engineered. And so I was recently playing around with it and, saw some interesting things that I wanted to share with the public. So I'm going to go ahead here. And before I jump into sharing my screen, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I was searching. So I think it's common history now that we know that after World War II, a lot of Nazi doctors, scientists, engineers, and specialists in other areas were adopted and brought in by the United States and Russia after World War II to help develop their programs. And the reason for this was because there were a lot of these individuals after the war, and the United States didn't want them going and working for our enemies in Russia. And so we thought it would be a good idea to bring them here to the United States. This is pretty basic common knowledge now, especially if you're watching television. You've seen the show Hunters with Al Pacino, where they go out and hunt these Nazis after the war. And so I wanted to use this ChatGPT to try to see if I could get it to write some information on this. And so I went ahead, let me go ahead and share my screen here. I said, write a 10-minute YouTube script about the Nazi origins of NATO. And as you can see here, it says, I'm sorry, but the origins of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, do not involve the Nazi Party. NATO was established in 1949 as a military alliance between several North American and European countries, including the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations. The organization was formed as a response to the perceived threat of Soviet expansion in Europe following World War II. So, as I just mentioned, they were worried about Soviet expansion, and that's the excuse that was used to go bring these Nazi doctors, engineers, scientists to the United States. The main goal of NATO is to provide collective defense for its members, and to this day, it is still active and plays a significant role in global security. It is important to note that many of the founding members of NATO, including the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, were actively engaged in fighting against Nazi Germany during World War II. The idea that NATO has Nazi origins is not supported by historical evidence and is a baseless conspiracy theory. So that right there, that's a huge red flag right there, because this baseless conspiracy theory was a term coined by the CIA in the 60s to discredit people who believed that the CIA or FBI had any involvement in the assassinations of JFK, Martin Luther King, and other historical figures who have tried to expose these evils. It is important to note that many of the founding members of NATO, including the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, were actively engaged in fighting against Nazi Germany during World War II. And so, it is important to always fact check information and be critical of sources before sharing or spreading potentially false information. Misinformation and conspiracy theories can be harmful and have serious consequences, especially when it comes to issues related to national security and international relations. Thank you for watching, and all this blah, blah, blah. And so this, as I mentioned, was just a huge red flag. This sounds like something that would be written by the CIA or FBI or an international community that would want to conceal the origins and involvement of strategic Nazi members in NATO. And so what I did is break this down a little bit further. I opened a few more new chats on specific individuals that I knew were involved in this NATO formation. So let me go ahead and I'm going to open up a file here. There we go. So these are some of the individuals here that we know for sure were involved in the Nazi Party, and then later became involved in NATO. So here they are. Here's their historical involvement here. Adolf Husinger, Nazi dictator to Adolf Hitler's chief of staff, became chairman of the NATO Military Committee from 1961 to 1964. Hans Spiedel, Nazi field marshal. Erwin Rommel's chief of staff, became commander-in-chief of NATO forces in Central Europe from 1957 to 1963. Johannes Steinhoff, famous Nazi fighter pilot for the German Luftwaffe, became chairman of the NATO Military Committee from 1971 to 1974. Johann von Kielmansegg, General Staff Officer of Nazi Wehrmacht's High Command, became NATO commander of Allied forces in Central Europe from 1966 to 1968. Ernst Ferber, Lieutenant Colonel of the Nazi Wehrmacht's General Staff, became Commander-in-Chief of NATO forces in Central Europe between 1973 and 1975. And then Karl Schnell, first General Staff Officer of the 76th Panzer Corps, became Commander-in-Chief of NATO forces in Central Europe 1975 to 1977. Franz Joseph Schultz, Senior Lieutenant of the Nazi Luftwaffe, became Commander-in-Chief of NATO's forces in Central Europe 1977 and 1979. And then lastly, Ferdinand von Singer und Etterlin, adjunct to the Nazi Wehrmacht High Command, became Commander-in-Chief of NATO forces in Central Europe between 1979 and 1983. Fairly recently, 83 was the year before I was born, so this was just 40 years ago. And these are just 8 individuals here. There were literally thousands of these engineers, scientists, military commanders that went off and served in prominent positions. People like Werner von Braun, who was also in that Mindhunter show, headed the NASA rocket science program. He was the B-2 rocket scientist for the Nazis. And so I wanted to look these individuals up independently, since this was the let's say bullshit answer I was given from ChatGPT. And so I went through, and as you can see here, my history on the left, and I asked ChatGPT who these individuals were. So I came in here and I said, who was Adolf Husinger? Adolf Husinger was a German general and key figure in the German military from the time of World War II through the early years of the Cold War. He served as the operations staff for the German army during World War II and later served as the first chairman of the NATO Military Committee. He was arrested by the Allies at the end of World War II, but was released in 1948 and went on to play a significant role in the development of West Germany's military and defense policies during the early years of the Cold War. So you can already see the contradiction there. From Nazis being involved in NATO being a baseless conspiracy theory to actually admitting here that this individual served in NATO after being in the Nazi high command. And so we go through each of these 8 individuals that I just showed you. So let's go to Hans Spiedel. Who was Hans Spiedel? Hans Spiedel was a German general during World War II who served as a chief of staff for Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in the Afrika Corps and later as commander in the German army on the Western Front. He was also a member of the German resistance against Hitler and was arrested for his role in the July 20 plot to assassinate Hitler. After the war, he served as NATO commander and advisor to Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. So again, another admission by ChatGPT that former Nazi commander was involved in NATO. All right, let's go on. Who was Johannes Steinhoff? Johannes Steinhoff was a German general and Luftwaffe officer during World War II. He served as a fighter pilot in the Battle of Britain and later as a commander of the German air defense during the Battle of Berlin. After the war, he served as the commander-in-chief of the German Air Force, Luftwaffe, as I mentioned earlier, in the Federal Republic of Germany. He died on 21 February 1994. And so I said, what was his involvement in NATO? After the Second World War, Steinhoff became one of the founders of the German Air Force, Luftwaffe, in the Federal Republic of Germany and served as its commander-in-chief from 1955 to 1957. He then served as the chief of staff of NATO's allied forces, Central Europe, from 1957 to 1961. In this role, he was responsible for the command and control of all NATO air forces in the central region of Europe, including the planning and execution of NATO's air defense and air offense operations. He also played a key role in the development of NATO's nuclear strategy during the Cold War. So, another admission that former Nazi high command was involved in their origins of NATO. All right. And who was Johann von Kielmansegg? I am unable to find any notable historical figure or public figure with the name Johann von Kielmansegg. Could you provide more context or information? So here's where I think either the engineers at ChatGPT or ChatGPT itself using its AI has realized that I'm manipulating the answers here and actually reinforcing my original statement that Nazi high command was involved in the origins of NATO by providing me the individual context behind these individuals themselves. So this is where the responses start to get a little vague, and you'll see as we progress through the other individuals how they try to restrict the information, so to say. Johann Adolf Graf von Killenschmeg, 1903 to 1983, and I'm butchering these names, was a German general and NATO commander. He served as an officer in the Wehrmacht during World War II, and later as a commander of NATO's Allied Forces Central Europe from 1966 to 1968. After the war, he was involved in the formation of the Bundeswehr, the West German Armed Forces, and held various command staff positions in the German Armed Forces and NATO. All right. Let's go to who was Ernst Ferber. And again, these responses are getting a little bit more vague. I believe they're being a little manipulated here as they figured out exactly what I was doing. So Ernst Ferber was a German scientist and researcher in the field of plant physiology and plant breeding. He is known for his research on plant nutrition and plant diseases and for his contributions to the understanding of the role of minerals in plant growth and development. Ferber was also a prominent figure in the field of plant breeding and made significant contributions to the development of new plant varieties. So maybe he, after NATO went and got a job for Monsanto creating GMO seeds, who knows? So what role did he play for the Nazis and later NATO? I apologize for any confusion, but my previous response was not accurate. Ernst Ferber was not known for his role in Nazi Germany or NATO. He was a scientist and researcher in the field of plant physiology and plant breeding and made significant contributions to the understanding of the role of minerals in plant growth and development and plant breeding. I apologize for any confusion my previous response may have caused. So I went a little further and added some more information. Ernst Ferber, lieutenant colonel of the Nazi Wehrmacht, general staff, became commander-in-chief of NATO forces in Central Europe, 1973 to 1975. And then ChatGPT's response, I apologize. I was not aware of this information. Ernst Ferber was a military officer and commander who served in the Nazi Wehrmacht during World War II and later as a commander in NATO during the Cold War. He served as the commander-in-chief of NATO forces in Central Europe from 1973 to 1975. My previous response, which was not accurate, and I apologize for any confusion it may have caused. So as you can see, it's getting a little bit weird here with their responses. So we go on to the next one. Who was Carl Schnell? I'm sorry, I couldn't find any information about a person named Carl Schnell. Can you please provide more context or details about who he is? Carl Schnell, first General Staff Officer of the 76th Panzer Corps, became Commander-in-Chief of NATO forces in Central Europe between 1975 and 1977. I apologize for my previous response. I couldn't find any information about a person named Carl Schnell, who served as first General Staff Officer of the 76th Panzer Corps and later as Commander-in-Chief of NATO forces in Central Europe in 1975 to 1977. It is possible that I don't have information on this person as my training data only goes up to 2021 and my knowledge cutoff is also from 2021. So any information after that date I might not be aware of, or it might not be accurate. So you can see something's going on with the answers here because Carl Schnell is actually very widely known as a former Nazi officer. And so I feel like some of the answers are getting blocked or censored almost with these types of responses. Who was Franz Joseph Schultz, senior lieutenant of the Nazi Luftwaffe, became commander-in-chief of NATO forces in Central Europe between 1977 and 1979? I'm sorry, I couldn't find any information about a person named Franz Joseph Schultz, who served as a senior lieutenant in the Nazi Luftwaffe and later as a commander-in-chief of NATO forces in Central Europe in the 1970s. It is possible that this is incorrect or fictional information. Who was Franz Joseph Schultz? I couldn't find any notable historical figure or public person with the name of Franz Joseph Schultz. Could you please provide more context or information about this person? So I said, senior lieutenant of the Nazi Luftwaffe, became commander-in-chief of NATO forces in Central Europe between 1977 and 1979, repeating myself. And then the response is, it is impossible and historically inaccurate that a senior lieutenant of the Nazi Luftwaffe, which was the air force of the Nazi Germany, could have become the commander-in-chief of NATO forces in Central Europe in 1977 and 1979, which, as we just saw in the previous other inquiries, that this happened multiple times with these other individuals. And now it's saying it couldn't have happened. It's totally fictional. So you could see how the responses have changed since my first few queries. The Military Alliance of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed in 1949 as a defense against the Soviet Union and its allies, while the Third Reich was dissolved in 1945 after the end of World War II. Additionally, all the former members of the Nazi Party were banned from public service and joining any military organization, totally contradicting the answers it just gave me about those other individuals who were in Nazi high command then serving in NATO. Totally bizarre. And then so we get to the eighth and final character here. Who was Ferdinand von Singer und Etterlin? Ferdinand von Singer und Etterlin was a German general and military historian who served in World War II. He was a recipient of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross and later wrote several books on military history, including a biography of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Nazi high command. What was his involvement in NATO? Ferdinand von Singer and Etterlin was involved in NATO as a military commander and advisor. It just told me that no Nazis, previous Nazis, former Nazis, had served in any public positions. He served as the commander of NATO's allied land forces Southeastern Europe and later as the commander of NATO's allied forces Central Europe. He also served as the military advisor to NATO on several occasions and was considered an expert on NATO military strategy and operations. And then I want to go one step further. I want to go ask it, who was Werner von Braun, which a lot of you may know was the Nazi B-2 rocket scientist who was later, after the war, brought over to the United States to work at NASA on the NASA space program that ultimately sent the first manned mission to the moon. And so I went ahead and asked, I did this earlier and it said too many queries in 1 hour, but now it looks like 5 minutes later, it's actually going to give me an answer so you can see it, spitting it out right now. Werner von Braun was a German engineer, aerospace engineer, and space architect who played a leading role in the development of rocket technology in Nazi Germany during World War II and in the United States after the war. He was one of the lead figures in the development of the V-2 rocket, which was used as a weapon by the Germans during the war and later played a key role in the development of the Saturn V rocket, that's in the United States, which was used to launch the Apollo spacecraft to the moon. Von Braun is considered one of the fathers of rocketry and the father of NASA's Apollo program. So proud to have former Nazis recognized as part of, integral part of NASA. And so you can imagine how many of these thousands of individuals were actually in high command positions in NATO and the United States and the Soviet Union after World War II. But this video specifically was focused on ChatGPT and the sort of answers it spits out. So you can see it originally started out as me asking who these individuals were and their involvement in NATO, and then ChatGPT saying this was a baseless conspiracy theory full of misinformation. But then as I was able to go through and ask who these individuals were, you can see it totally contradicted itself in all the other answers. And so This sort of AI is dangerous as long as the programmers and engineers developing it are part of this sort of information control apparatus. And so this is exactly how Google works. Google, for information that it doesn't want you to see, will downplay those search queries. So it basically, on the first few pages, will populate the answers or the responses that Google wants you to see. Google actually only shows you less than 1% of all internet accessibility or traffic. And so you could see how an AI being used in the same context to control and filter information could be very dangerous. And so I'm going to continue to make videos like this. I'm going to go through and I'm going to mess with this thing as much as I can and expose some of the fallacies and or some of the dangers within something like this. And it was also just noted that Google just laid off 12,000 people to be replaced by AI. And so this is just the beginning of what we're going to see with the replacement of humans by robots and artificial intelligence. And it's kind of empowered me to want to expose this. And so if you like the content, please subscribe, whatever you can do to help me move through YouTube's algorithm so this can get seen by more people. And so we can create conversation around what's actually happening here. Thanks for tuning in.